I'm very happy to introduce Jeff Danziger. Many of us are familiar with Jeff Danziger's cartoons, I'm sure, from various publications like the New York Times and New Yorker. Before he was an internationally renowned political cartoonist, Jeff Danziger was an intelligence officer during the Vietnam War and was awarded both the Bronze Star and the Air Medal. The awards have just kept coming since he switched careers. Jeff is the recipient, for example, of the Herblock Prize and the Thomas Nast Award Prize for his cartoons of political commentary, which currently appear in publications all over the country and indeed the world. He's represented by the CWS and New York Times syndicates. He's also published several books of cartoons and a novel. His newest collection of drawings released this summer, which we have here on the book table, is The Conscience of a Cartoonist, a collection of post-9/11 cartoons, complete with extensive educational commentary on that event and its aftermath. I should say also, it's published by the Center for Cartoon Studies in White River Junction, which those of us, including me, who are from the Upper Valley, are very proud of. It's a great new place for cartoonists to study and all kinds of creative things going on there. John le Carre has declared that Jeff Danziger is everything a great political cartoonist should be in this over-reverential world savage. Merciless, accurate, ribald, and blessed with a lovely eye and hand. On the other hand, Fox News commentator Bernard Goldberg included Jeff in a list of 100 people who are screwing up America, a designation the cartoonist took as a great honor. The BBC calls him simply a genius. Jeff has been kind enough to come all the way from New York City to talk with us today about his remarkable new collection and his process. Please give a warm Burlington Book Festival welcome to Jeff Danziger.
Thank you very much for coming. I did a talk in Ireland once, and almost nobody showed up. And the Irish guy said, well, they were held up by good weather. It was a nice sunny day. I'm going to show some cartoons here today. Really quickly beforehand, say something about myself. And most of these cartoons are chosen with the idea that I would discuss something that is difficult in the cartooning trade. And the first thing that's difficult in the cartooning trade is making any money, which gets more and more difficult. I'm involved with an international group, and while political cartoons have their fans in this country, usually the newspapers don't care one way or the other, and they're kind of ambivalent. However, in other parts of the world, they're very, very popular, and the reason for that is that language is a difficulty throughout the rest of the world. So that if you do something graphically which shows your disdain for some political leader or the fact that he's a pig or a bloodsucker or so on and so forth, it's evident even to people who can't speak the language. My friend, the cartoonist, a wonderful guy from Burkina Faso, Damien Glaise. You know, we all know where Burkina Faso is? No. It is the former Upper Volta. Does that help? No, it's in West Africa. It's a good-sized country, but he said, you know, we have 60 languages in the one country. 60 languages, half of which aren't written down. So he said, when we put out the newspaper and we have a cartoon on the front page or someplace in there that shows what the situation is graphically, everybody understands it. And the same is true throughout most of Europe and certainly throughout most of Central and South America. We always think of Mexico as being everybody speaks Spanish. It's not true. They speak lots of other languages, and the same is true throughout the rest of the continent. I'll say briefly something about myself in addition to that fine introduction. I was born in New York and moved to Vermont in 1965, and then I was drafted in 62 6 and spent 4 years in the Army, and I came back and began doing cartoons. I began teaching school and began doing cartoons for the Times-Argus. The Times-Argus had just switched over to offset, which meant that they didn't have to pay for engraving, which was a great boon to those of us who were drawing. And the Argus in, I think in about 74, 75, had heard that the Burlington Free Press, I think some of you here remember the Burlington Free Press. The Burlington Free Press was going to start a Sunday edition, so they quickly threw together this Sunday edition, which didn't have a lot of advertising, but it had this huge news hole every week. And when the story ran short, I would go down there and work in the evening doing pictures of various things. They ran a story one time about how to gut a deer. And the outdoor editor called me in. He said, well, we want to picture this deer, and then we want the dotted line for where you draw, where you cut the line. And of course, the idea in gutting a deer is to keep the guts away from the meat. And you have to take the knife and go right around the end of the digestive tract. So we wanted a picture of this deer recumbent with this little dotted line going around his anyway. So, and then we had to put in the anus there with a little dot. These are the kinds of problems that arise from time to time. And all right. So we'll talk about, we're going to show some cartoons here today. Some of them are international, we'll start with, and then we'll go to a series that I've developed about the problem of sex in political cartoons. And we ought to get to that just about with the time when you're really getting tired and your head's falling forward. So, and then after that, we'll do some of the Vermont ones, which are, of course, the best. Right. And I'm going to discuss from here, which I can't see. Which series is this on? What is which list was it? The new the new. Yes. Okay. All right. Fine. I can probably hear from you from out here. Okay.
You on the microphone, sir. We need you on the
I'm just so dumb. Very good. All right. That's fine. Well, one of the problems when you have somebody like Jimmy Carter, which I like Jimmy Carter. He's a wonderful ex-president. I don't know if he was a good ex-president, but you always want to show him as somebody that you have some feeling for. And the other problem in this cartoon, of course, is the rendering of water, which has baffled artists, not just cartoonists, baffled artists and animators for many years. This is not a bad rendering of water. And Jimmy Carter is saying, there you are, George. Wanted to stop by an apology and apologize. What I really meant to say, anyway, he had called Carter, he had called Bush the worst, and then he apologized and said, no, that wasn't true. And everybody said, well, you should know. All right. Okay. This one here begins a problem that we all have about who is Uncle Sam. Cartoonists use Uncle Sam to represent what? The country, the nation, the people, our history. Nobody really knows who Uncle Sam is, and yet he keeps showing up. He shows up in other countries. He shows up as this horrible character who is doing everything wrong. I lived in Plainfield for a good long time, and the Bread and Puppet Circus used to have this great a great character of Uncle Sam with a big cigar and kind of bloody-eyed, and they would. You want it around a little bit more that way? Is that okay? But Bread and Puppet used to have this great big Uncle Sam, was about 20 feet tall, and they would drag it down out for 4th of July parades and for other parades, and it was wonderful. And I always thought that they were actually, in their own way, great political cartoonists. Okay? This cartoon is, incorporates a piece of, if anybody here is from California, you know that when you drive up from San Diego is actually not where they check to find out whether you're an alien. They check north of San Diego so that people come up, they can get across the border and they come up through the mountains and then they cross over onto the highway and their friends pick them up. They'd be Mexican aliens. When they're running across the highway, there were a whole series of these terrible accidents where entire families would get hit by a truck. So a gentleman in the highway department drew this little silhouette of the three people running along. And so I used it because this was for the Los Angeles Times. But it was curious that the guy, he actually was written up a few years ago, the guy that did this drawing. Very effective, very fast, very memorable, and even when it wasn't memorable, it made you stop and think, why do they have this picture of these running people? And then suddenly it occurs to you, okay? The problem in this cartoon, which I think is a good debt of Bush loading up debt on the American people, is that people don't know what an anvil is anymore. And why they don't know what an anvil is because nobody has anvils anymore because they don't have horses. But Pat Oliphant, who I worship from afar, always has these anvils dropping out of the sky on people. And you ask, well, what is that thing? You know, it's an oddly shaped thing. So that was the okay. There's a news story that says that if a dog bites a man, it's not news. If the man bites the dog, it is news. So here we have the hydrant taking a pee on Rudy Giuliani. Rudy Giuliani was a gift to us all, I mean, and continues to be. I mean, he was a man who was so rotten, selfish, and vicious that he not only announced his divorce on television, which is pretty creative, but had the girlfriend move into Gracie Mansion while his family was still living there. Now that takes, okay? And here, Mr. Giuliani testing the winds down south. He went down south. He was a New Yorker. He's an Italian New Yorker. He's a city kid. And he goes down south, and nobody could understand him in the first place, but they could sense that he was vicious, and they liked that part. Go ahead. Okay? I think we have to like Al Gore because his heart is sort of in the right place, although he's gotten very money hungry in the last couple of years. And the victims of global warming don't care about prizes; they just want some fish. Okay. The problem in this one was that people don't remember I don't know who wrote the song, whether it was Bessie Smith or who it was, Strange Fruit. And Billie Holiday, right, Billie Holiday, sorry. Obviously they don't, right? And, but there was a lynching in this town of Jena, Louisiana. And I would send this cartoon out, and you know, sometimes they would call up, and editors would call up and say, we don't get it. I said, well, it's a song by, Billie Holiday. Who? So the problem being that it's generational, people just don't get it, okay? Karl Rove leaves home, and drat, I left the lights on. If you don't know that phrase that the lights are on but nobody's home, you don't get this. Karl Rove is a wonderful character for us cartoonists, okay? As you know, Lord, your numbers have never been lower, which is always the problem with people who try to get their religion mixed in with their politics, that God, the all-powerful, could supposedly do something if he wanted to. Obviously, he doesn't want to, or he's not there. I don't know what the reason is, okay? And Nixon, who one of the great cartoonists, Paul Conrad, when Nixon died, he said, I wept. Paul Conrad was the cartoonist at the Los Angeles Times, and he once did a cartoon of Nixon, and there was a cross and Nixon had one hand nailed in, and he had a hammer in his other hand, and he was it was just wonderful, wonderful imagery. Anyway, this is a cartoon that came from a woman named Elena Politskaya, and she was a very brave Russian journalist who wrote about all of the evil things at the Putin administration. She was gunned down in her hotel room. So this was the Putin School of Journalism. It's wrong. She was gunned down in the elevator shaft. She'd just gotten on the elevator, and the gunmen were on the elevator. But it was the first instance where people realized that Putin wasn't fooling around, and that he, as far as he was concerned, the Stalin rule of no man, no problem was the easiest way to deal with problems. Okay. This was missed by a lot of people because the people who were leaving. This was during Katrina, Katrina of flooding in Louisiana, and the people with cars, especially people with four-wheel drive, big, high four-wheel drives, could escape. The ones who didn't have four-wheel drives or cars of any sort couldn't, and wound up drowned. So whether it was survival of the fittest or there was some Darwinian element at stake, play, I don't know. Okay. Again, if people don't remember that there was always an uncle who would say, "Pull my finger," and then he'd fart. You know, this one. Why would you say, "Pull my finger"? I don't understand. All right. This cartoon makes no sense to anybody except that it introduces this character that I've used over the years of the war guy, this big, rough guy who's what I sort of figured out, or what I sort of hypothesized with that wars take on a life of their own. The people who start them are gone. The people who are fighting them don't know why they're fighting, but they don't stop, and they go on and on and on, and they have an impetus that takes a great deal of either a great deal of killing or a hydrogen bomb or an atom bomb or something like that to bring to an end. And if you don't have that, they just go on. So this character represents the enduring quality of wars, okay? The one thing that Rupert Murdoch, who I have a hard time liking, the one thing that he did do is he paid for The Simpsons, which is damn funny. And then he bought the Wall Street Journal, so I thought, well, maybe he'd put Homer Simpson in as the editor of the Wall Street Journal. But okay. And we're back. So let's go to the file on sex in cartoons. It isn't real sex, don't worry. Oops. Well, all I can say is I should have listened to my mother. Don't marry that bum. She told me you never pick anything up, you never help around the house. Look at the kitchen, you're a disgrace, and after I've given you the best years of my life. This originally ran in the Rutland Herald because of the issue of gay marriage was at its forefront in Vermont, and the Herald, through their editorials, and I like to think their cartoons, won a Pulitzer Prize for their editorial writing then. The Free Press, by the way, hasn't won a Pulitzer Prize for quite a while. In fact, they were up as a short list. You can tell this to your friends who work there. They were up on the short list, the short list of 3, and the Pulitzer Committee took a look at the 3, and they said, nah, none of the 3. And that year, they didn't give anybody a prize. Okay, yeah. Once again, Al Gore, happy at last. I just couldn't live with the lies, the guilt, the hiding. Al got unexpectedly divorced from his wife, Tipper, and just about the time that he was doing yeoman duty to save the polar bears. And it's pretty silly, but that's what it's supposed to be. Okay. One of my favorite people on the right is Ann Coulter, who is kind of a she's waiting for a strong, God-fearing Republican man, aren't we all? But actually, every once in a while she'll send me a note, some crazy rant note. You know, which I've kept for future reference, okay? And here she is again, Ann Coulter, wigged off about Herman Cain's sex scandal. For those of you who can't read it, this is a high-tech lynching. They got those women to accuse him of sexually inappropriate behavior. Sexually inappropriate behavior, indeed, I never saw any such I never have seen such sexually inappropriate behavior. Now, why do you think that is? All right. Okay. All right. The Prince Charles and Mrs. Parker Bowles. Do I dare to dream, darling? Oh, yes, my love. I guess they're happy. I don't know. I don't know why either one of them should be happy, but they are. There was somebody, I think it was Mencken, said that Mr. Jones married Mrs. Jones, God's wisdom making 2 people miserable instead of 4. Okay? And nobody remembers Carrie Prejean, who was a model. She was a Christian, and she also dressed up in skimpy clothing to make some money. She was Miss California, I think, or something. But she was the not your usual idea of what a Christian woman looks like. Okay? We will miss Benedict. What's this I hear about the great Catholic President John F. Kennedy having an adulterous affair with a 19-year-old trollop? Well, there's only her word. It happened, Your Grace. No proof then otherwise. No, it appears he used a contraceptive of some sort. One of those sinful condom things. And the Pope says, thank God. All right. All right. Okay. Chelsea, so Mom, should we invite the Palins? And Hillary says, well, yes, of course. This is to the wedding list. Just when they thought there was nothing to say more about the Palins, they had a fist fight in Alaska last week, and they all got drunk and had a fist fight with their friends, and I think you think, oh, there is a God, I didn't have any ideas that day, and so by the way, the Palins had a fist fight and got drunk. Oh, okay, that's fine. Anybody told John McCain yet? Okay, all right. Okay. Well, I don't remember what this one was about. Let's just go on to the next one. All right. Condoleezza Rice, who is an extraordinarily wealthy woman right now, by the way, plays a little ditty she composed herself. She was a fairly accomplished pianist, but the most amazing part of her entire life was when she, by mistake, called Bush her husband. I don't know if anybody remembers that. And there's the problem with having a memory where your memory is full of all these sticky little rotten details that you don't want to forget anything. Have little 3x5 cards in your pockets of things. But why would she do that? I mean, you don't do that. Anyway, so those of us who love the Bushes inordinately are waiting for something else to come out, right. And we're hopeful. Anyway, go ahead. All right. This is a very complicated cartoon. A lot of people didn't get that. Governor Spitzer, as you know, had an 18-year-old woman that he was going to see in Washington, D.C., which is sometimes called escorts. And so this was in Vermont. Governor Spitzer was attempted to cross state lines because someone has got an 18-year-old escort for sale. Now, this was a Vermont Sunday cartoon, but a lot of people on the editorial desk, they said, well, we don't get it. And I said, well, escort, it was a car. They made millions of them. Oh, did they? And no recollection. Okay. Once again, the Herald will run these cartoons of gays sitting around talking to each other because they just like to do this. But it's very difficult to do this, especially with the typical things of everybody kind of cute and short-haired and drinking drinks with a little umbrellas in them and so on. This is when they were going to start to draft people regardless of their sexual orientation. Well, I see myself as a heroic colonel or something. I don't want to serve my country too, but I can't see myself in camouflage. Duh. I mean, what's the point? No. Okay. Again, the problem of young, vibrant homosexuals. It's true, this morning we got up and we didn't know whether we wanted to burn the flag or get married. And then there was a security camera, heaven knows what we would have done. Okay, all right. And into the mix comes the man himself, Hugh Hefner, who is now 84, married a girl who was 24. And he says, I don't know about you, but I just like to hear the sound of little feet pattering around the house. Not too many papers ran this one. Somebody called up and said, well, does he really have false teeth? I said, I don't know. Probably not, but it doesn't make any difference. Okay. And then he moved in with 4 women. I've got the right arm, I've got the left, I've got the walker, I've got the oxygen. And it's helpful if you're going to do cartoons to be able to draw cute women in bikinis or without bikinis as necessary, but you can always get a good laugh with Hugh Hefner. I think there's one more Hefner card. Nope, I guess not. You know, it's so beautiful and peaceful, and then I remember we have to have sex. And some people said, well, why? And I said, well, I don't know. Anyway, good. Okay, yeah. For Berlin, what? Berlin Pond. Where is that? Berlin Pond? Berlin Pond. Oh, Berlin Pond. Yeah, well, that's, yeah, well.
We need all the help we can get.
Let's see. Is this part of that same series? Yeah, I guess so. Okay, well, that was one of the. And our Governor Brewer is no longer ahead. She was the one who claimed that they found heads of aliens in the Arizona desert. Okay. Okay. And once again, the woman who played the Witch of the West or whatever she was in the Wizard of Oz looked a great deal like a Jean Schmidt, who was a Republican representative from Ohio, and she called Jack Murtha a coward. Jack Murtha had a considerable military record, and so I went back to the Wizard of Oz imagery, which you can always sort of use. And you also have the tired line, we're not in Kansas anymore, which will probably come up because this guy, Governor Brownback, is probably going to be defeated this time around. Anyway, go ahead. Let's see. The most amazing person to come out of the Iraq War was Jessica Lynch, where the Army completely concocted this story about how she was captured and what happened to her and so on, how she was saved. It was all lies, and she finally came home and she said, no, that didn't happen that way. So that I was hypothesizing people that were going to jump on that heroic story had to go all the way back to the beginning or abandon the project altogether. Okay? He's dead now and sorely missed, Muammar Gaddafi, who Johnny Carson once said was the sound made by a cow throwing up. I thought that was pretty good. But he had an all-girl security team. And they were actually pretty good looking in a sort of a Libyan lady sort of way. Anyway, okay. Here's an example of trying to be serious, and I don't know whether it worked, but prostitution, which is sometimes called a victimless crime, is obviously not true. The sorrowful thing about this cartoon is that it's weepy and sappy, and it's supposed to be something that everybody can agree with. I don't think prostitution is a victimless crime, but I guess I don't know whether that's a universal feeling. Anyway, the idea here is that she's the prostitute, and there are always a child up in the window. Okay, and A character who you'll have to remind yourself of in a few years was Levi Johnston, who actually did run for mayor of Wasilla, Alaska. And the part that is hard to remember is this little sign up here in the corner, Wake Up Moran's. Does anybody remember that? There was a picture of this guy who was standing by the side of the road, and he was kind of a right-winger, and he was protesting when the lady who went to Crawford, Texas, and tried to see Bush about her son who had been killed. And I can't remember her name. But anyway, this guy was down the road protesting her, and he had a sign that said, "Wake up, Morans." He meant morons, but he couldn't even spell. I mean, you can't spell morons, you know. You have to. Okay. All righty. Again, Girls of Alaska, Whoopi, Levi Johnston is dating again in the back of the pickup truck. Jeff McNally, who was one of the great American political cartoonists, made more out of old pickup trucks than anybody else. All the trucks he always drew were like 48, 49, 51 Chevys with the big bulbous things, and it made a great deal of because people look at that and they go, yeah, those were the good old days back when trucks were trucks and not these huge things they are now. Okay. And again, I think I overdid the Levi Johnston story. No, you can't do that. Look, it's Daddy. Oh, he was in the paper. So now we get to Rush Limbaugh. All right. Rush Limbaugh, somebody said that the birth control pill was holding an aspirin between your knees. You can put Rush Limbaugh between you in bed, and there won't be any room for any hanky-panky. It's kind of unfair to make fun of Rush Limbaugh's weight, I suppose, but sometimes you have to do what you have to do, okay? Right. And then we have Martha Stewart. Martha Stewart, who had been on the board of the New York Stock Exchange and still wound up trading illegally somehow. But all the things that she wanted people to do, which was a lot of embroidery and a lot of little tchotchkes around the toilet and raising chickens, that she had moved into her jail cell. She's out. She's doing quite well now, so there are second acts in American life, okay? And then there's this curious figure of Mary Cheney, who is a lesbian, and the mother and the father will say nothing about it publicly. Okay? This is the Norman Rockwell Saturday Evening Post covers have become so well known that you can use them. And this one here, there was a cover that he did of a couple coming into the marriage office in obviously a small New England town, and applying for a license. And the girl was this beautiful young girl, and the husband was taller than she was by a lot, and kind of protecting her. And in back of the desk, as you can see, was the old Yankee town clerk who was thinking about, I remember when, except that in this one here, of course, it's two men. And to use all of that is probably not very imaginative, but I love Rockwell paintings. I mean, even though he's criticized for all sorts of things of being just an illustrator, not an artist, he was an artist. Okay? She's gone now, but there was a Mrs. Murdoch, a Chinese lady, who famously stopped the cream pie that somebody had thrown at Rupert. And one of the great video times, each one you think, thank God there's video. And but she was really was a Chinese. She was out for herself and trying to make money. Don't worry, son, I've left her to you. She's very popular in China. Okay. And I think this is the last one in this series. Or is that just wishful thinking? Yes, it is. All right. In France, you couldn't wear. They wanted to outlaw. They have outlawed the wearing of the Muslim headscarf. So there were some French students who I don't know if they actually did this, but they talked about that they were going to wear that and nothing else, and mount the barricades. Okay, let's look at some Vermont ones because I think it's time to yes, Bev. Is this a bunch? Yes, yeah, okay. This was done some time ago, and the fuel rods from the Vermont Yankee were lost. They fell off a truck or something, and so people going along in the green up day and said, "Be sure to look out. If you see any fuel rods, be sure to let us know." Okay. These were done during a summer of great amounts of rain, which we often have, and the Argus and the Herald decided that on Sunday we should do cartoons about life in Vermont rather than people had probably had enough politics by that by that time of the week. So okay. There was a deal, which actually I think fell through, to sell $6 million worth of powdered milk to Cuba. And in a state like Vermont, where people were, many people were proud of their socialist, if not their Marxist leanings, this went over very big. Why shouldn't we help, you know? So the two little cows saying, "Que pasa, Fidel?" And of course they have little Fidel beards on. The barn itself is kind of interesting. I've always liked those high drive barns. Okay. Speaking of milk, I lived in Plainfield, and every so often the dam or catch basin of the Winooski River from the Cabot cheese factory would break open and blow, and all the whey and unprocessed cheese byproducts would come floating down the river through Marshfield, and it stank. You know. So that smells awful. Well, maybe it's artisanal. Right. Right. And nobody remembers dear old Rich Tarrant, who had a place in Florida, and this lady Rick Tarrant answers your questions. How's Florida? Okay. Bringing us back to my favorite was John McMullen, who didn't know how many teats a cow had, which was kind of a stupid reason for not voting for him, but it did seem to work. And Fred Tuttle, I don't know why John McMullen would let himself get into a debate with somebody like Fred Tuttle. And Fred Tuttle says, "I'll bet you don't know." And he blah, 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 blah. I said, well, no, seriously, how many teats does a cow have? And John, relying on his knowledge of teats in general, said 2. And that was the end of him. That was the end. So anyway, this is, and then they wanted to register livestock to put a vanity plate on the back of the cow. I don't know. There also is a Bernie sticker on the back of this cow's ass. Okay. Howard Dean let Al Gore come up, and one of the things he wanted to do was drive a snowplow truck. So maybe I'd like to drive one too, but okay. One of my rules is if you don't have much of an idea, spend a lot of time on the artwork. And luckily for me, I've done carpentry on some of these old houses, so I know the various things, including the lazy window, which is a New England sort of thing. And many people today, when you talk about lazy windows, they think that it's something that you did to be funny. You know, whereas, of course, as we all know, there are lazy windows, and there's a very good reason for it. Well, this was if you don't live in a swing state, nobody shows up here during election years because we don't have a primary that amounts to anything. But if you live in Ohio or in Iowa or in New Hampshire, God help us, or you wind up with the influx of political people and journalists. Okay, and this was Killington who wanted to leave Vermont for some reason and join New Hampshire where the taxes were lower. So the reaction of most people was, don't let the door hit you. Right. Okay? This was a sad one. The town of Proctor lost 2 people in 1 week. Lost 2. I don't think they were brothers, but they might have been. But that was during a period of the early part of the war when Vermont had lost more people per capita than any other state in the country. It's not true anymore, but okay. And let the Arab bastards freeze in the basement. I've been a big proponent of wood heat, and I think it serves as a way for people to save money and be comfortable and be warm, and it certainly is renewable. Okay. These are two coming up on of kind of a village that I've constructed out of my knowledge of Vermont villages, and most all Vermont villages are near rivers and have dams, which is the reason they were built there in the first place. This was after the Red Sox victory. The riots break out across New England. 3 people. All right. All right. Okay. Okay, let's skip this one. That's just terrible. Minutemen from the South say they will send some observers to the Vermont-Canadian border. And all they've seen so far is 2 guys going north for a job. Okay? All right. The subject says she had to do 90 or she'd miss the peak of the foliage season. Cop says, I don't think a warning is going to work. Okay? If you've been in the service, you know that you get a little shovel thing that fits in your backpack. It's called an entrenching tool. And since these guys were fighting in Iraq, they weren't digging trenches, but they might have needed it to shovel through the snow when they got some leave to come home. Okay. Again, the same sort of little village. Things that tourists notice. There's no Starbucks. I know, it's like really unspoiled, but I love the. With a full shed of no, go ahead. You're right. With a full shed of with a shed full of wood and the storm windows on, we can bravely say, "Bring it on." "Bring it on" was the George Bush thing. Okay. Again, kids being naughty and doing cannonballs to splash water on girls. Okay. If we didn't boil it as long, we could sell it as reduced carb syrup. I don't think there's anything nicer than spending a couple of days working in a sugar house. And my old friend Henry Bissix used to make tea by taking a cup of sweet hot water out of the middle of the pan and putting a tea bag in it. Okay? And I think this is our last one. I lived in Plainfield for a while, and Goddard College was finally closed up, and it was just too irresistible to do a cartoon of the hippies all leaving Goddard College. The details on here, which you probably can't read, but I think they're in the book, in one of the books, of them all packing up the old Volkswagen bus, which down here you can't see has a Fred Harris campaign sticker. Nobody remembers Fred Harris, do they? Well, you do, yes, of course. No. Well, he's in Oklahoma. Oklahoma congressman who, out of nowhere, showed up and began saying things against the war. And he was adopted, in a way, by all of the anti-war people. He was very, very popular for a while. And then I think he died, right? He just died. Anyway. But over in the left-hand corner, is a box of Old Duke, which I don't think they make anymore. But Old Duke was the preferred drink of Vermont hippiedom. It was awful. I mean, it was just a sort of it was a wine product, they called it, to which we've added alcohol and sugar. And if that's not good enough for you, then you better do. Anyway, I think that's all. Yes. Okay. Okay. Thank you. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that anyone has.
How come there's always the first cap patch on the?
I was in the first cap. I was put this first cap on. I can never remember to this day whether the horse faces forward or backward. Yeah, but it was my old. Yes. Yes, ma'am.
I'm a great fan of the New Yorker cartoons from way back, but they aren't as funny anymore. Is that because I'm too old?
You?
Yeah. I mean, who decides? What have you published in the New Yorker recently?
I have had one big page in the New Yorker that I did with somebody else, but it's I don't know what they want. My father used to say the New Yorker's problem is that they couldn't add new readers without taking a chance of losing the old ones, because it was a generational divide. And most of the sophisticated humor, which you only get if you've lived a bunch of years, is missed and so the advertisers will come in and say, well, you know what? Well, I don't understand why they choose the cartoons they do. I know several of them, of the cartoonists, and they don't understand it either. You know, but sometimes they're extraordinarily funny. Sometimes they're just plain dumb.
Used to be very funny.
Yes.
I think part of that is, because I read them all the time, I think part of it is they're so timely and they poke fun, they generate fun on this. There's so many about fun, and that's probably not very funny to people who aren't surrounded by it. You know. But it could be.
I had a friend who we suggested a cartoon was going to go in and said, there was a party at an apartment in New York City, and the woman says to her husband, talking about somebody else, of all the nerve, she said our apartment looked like $1 million. Now, you know, and they didn't get it. They didn't think that was funny. Yes. Yes.
How was social media impacted? Part of getting at is that nowadays people on their phone are looking at Facebook and people are posting funny videos, pictures, and so on and so on.
The advantage of social media, or I would just say the internet for us, is that it's much cheaper to get out artwork across the world, and it's also, if you want to do things that are international, you'll have another audience out there. The disadvantage of it is that the newspapers are kind of dying, and they're not actually dying. They think they're dying. I mean, they're going back to a lower level. But people, as Tina Brown said, the problem with American newspapers isn't that they're paper, it's that they're dull. Most of them are extraordinarily dull. They've been bought by corporations who don't care about the news, who don't care about anything except the quarterly numbers, and they put really pathetic stuff in it. I think you're fortunate in Vermont. The Herald and the Times are both very, very good newspapers, but they are family-owned, and the family doesn't want to see them go away, and they work hard at it. And it is difficult. But there's other very good news media that come out of the internet. Vermont Digger, I think, is a wonderful site. A lot of the others, and you can read stuff from India and from France, and I think that's actually quite good. I've tried to run cartoons on a French website, and I sent in several. It was about the Israel conflict. It wouldn't touch them. So if you think political correctness is rampant in this country, it's rampant everywhere. Right? I'm sorry. Yeah.
I remember when the Times-Argus first started publishing a Sunday paper, and that's how we got to know you and your work. And so I want to say that I really appreciate that you still do cartoons of and for Vermont, most notably Judge Murtha in the wagon with his lollipop after the court decided against Vermont and in favor of Entergy.
Yeah, that was a good one.
Yeah,
my problem is I can't remember them.
It's okay. Vermont Digger ran.
Yeah.
That was the other one.
Yeah.
And, so thank you, and I'm serious about Berlin Pond.
Well,
if you just read a little bit about the pollution that can come from aquatic organisms, etc., on even.
Well, it's not just Berlin Pond; it's Lake Champlain. I mean, it's not just Berlin Pond; it's Lake Champlain. But, there's a great deal of. I don't know very much about the Vermont legislature. I've never gone and listened to them, but I probably should. So all I get is the reported version of what's going on there.
I don't think it was even the legislature that decided. I think it was Shumlin and some tiny group of people, but it's.
Yeah.
it's important.
Yes, ma'am.
It was interesting to hear you mention, visual references that are dated, like the anvil, like who knows what that could be.
Yeah.
That must be quite a challenge to kind of keep up with what people are going to recognize or understand or attach meanings to.
Yes, it is a challenge, and you can either say, I don't care, or very often I'll get a letter from somebody, and the emails, one thing that comes out of social media or email or the internet is that people see a cartoon and they write to you directly. They don't write through some editor who doesn't want to, they let you know, and they sound off. Sometimes they do it anonymously, which I think is a little cowardly, but when that happens and they say, well, I don't understand it, what is that thing? So, well, you're on the computer, for pity's sake. Look it up, you know. Who's Fred Harris? Look it up, you know. Anyway, yes.
Do you like being a cartoonist?
I'm sorry?
Do you like being a cartoonist?
I love it. Yeah. It's you know, it's a route to the high two figures, as what Gordon says, but it is a great deal. I have to have another job. I make more advertising money than I do cartooning money. But it is enjoyable. It's great when the idea hits, and it's just in time. I have a friend who has the best job in the world. He works for the Irish Times in Dublin. So a cardinal, I guess he's a cardinal now, he was the bishop then, had come from Dublin to Baltimore. And while he was in Baltimore, he had an affair. And the result of the affair was a baby was born. And then he went back to Dublin, and it was discovered, and it was a big scandal. And so Martin Turner, my friend, was out working in his garden, and he suddenly had this idea of, forgive me, sinners, for I have fathered. Right? And it was one of these things that hits you in the head, and you go, oh my God. And he ran into the house, and he drew it up really quickly, and he was going to put it on, he lives about 30 miles from Dublin, he's going to put it on the fax machine, and then he thought, what if the fax machine, what if nobody, he jumps in his car, and drives all the way to Dublin, and he goes in, and he says, wait, stop, you have to see this. He shows it to them, shows it to his editors, they all laugh, ha, ha, ha. And they say, Martin, you sit out there, we'll have to have a meeting about this. They go in, shut the door, didn't let him in the meeting, and they're in there for about 20 minutes, and they come out and they say, well, Martin, we can't run this. But good news is we got somebody else who agrees to run it. Another paper that we're going to give it to. So, okay, if there are no other questions, thank you very much. All right,